Hello, this is the Dreadweaver. Prepare yourself for an evening of horrifying tales that will weave webs of terror in the darkest corners of your mind. If you're a fan of stories of mystery, true crime, paranormal, or anything that crawls in the shadows just beyond our sight, you've found the right place. This week, we have 7 brand new frightening tales to share with you. If you have a story to share, be sure to reach out via the details listed in the description below. If you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications. All of these actions tell YouTube you want to hear more from us. And with that, let us delve into the darkness. Story 1. She Was Just Here by helpblondi. I'm starting to talk about the paranormal things that I have encountered, as there have been a lot. My mom says that we are more open to the spiritual world, as she has experienced very weird and unexplained things the same way that I have. This story is one told by my grandmother. I did not experience it myself, but I would like to hear your thoughts on the story. My grandmother lives in a small village in Serbia, and there are a lot of weird things that happen there. I remember her first telling me this story when I was a bit younger, and we still talk about it. I get creeped out every time we talk about it. So here it goes. About 30 years ago, when my grandmother first moved to this village, there was a murder that happened 2 streets away from her. An elderly couple that had been married for 40 years got into a big argument. The wife turned away from the husband mid-argument to go outside. He took a heavy metal pan and hit her on the back of her head. She immediately fell down, and he said he couldn't find her pulse. He claimed that he didn't want to kill her, and that he just wanted to stop her from going away. He knew that if he called the police, there was no way he could get out of it. He rolled her body in a carpet and buried her under cement in the basement of their house. 2 months went by, and his conscience got the best of him. He went to the police and admitted what he had done. When the police asked him why he was admitting to the crime now, he said that she was haunting him. He said every morning she would stand in the kitchen, as if she was alive, and make him coffee and breakfast. He would try to close his eyes and open them again, but she wouldn't go away. The police, of course, said this was his conscience getting the best of him, but he claimed she was really there and that he wasn't crazy. He was arrested, and the police, of course, didn't pay any attention to what the man was saying about his wife's ghost. When the police went to talk to neighbors to try to gather information and see if anybody had heard or seen anything, they were left shocked. All of the neighbors swore that they had seen her over the past 2 months. One of the neighbors said she came to buy eggs a couple of days prior, and she was last seen by another neighbor just 2 days prior going for a walk. They said hi to each other, and the neighbors swore it was her. The police immediately formed a new theory, and it was that the man had just killed his wife and went into a shock or denial and got the timing wrong, or that he was lying for some reason. When the police finally got the body out of the cement, it was confirmed that the woman had died at least 2 months ago, confirming the husband's story. Even after the date of her murder was released, the neighbors still claimed that they had seen her, even though that was not possible. After the woman's burial, her 2 sisters were coming to her house to retrieve some of the items, and they claimed that they saw her from outside, washing the dishes and smiling at them from the window. The house this happened in is now abandoned, as nobody ever moved in after the murder. I get creeps every time I have to go by that house and avoid it at all times. Story 2. My Grandma Healed My Brother by Word Disastrous 7633. So back when I was little, my brother had an enlarged artery and a heart murmur that we were constantly going back and forth to multiple hospitals to try to treat. When I was 7 and my brother was 9, my grandma passed away. We had only met her a couple times as we had immigrated to the United States and she was back in the old country. The world wasn't so connected yet with video calling, cheap flights, etc. A few days after she died, my brother woke up in tears. He told us he saw our grandma in his dream and she smiled at him and pointed at his heart, then touched it. My parents were spooked, but wrote it off as a dream. The next time we went to the hospital, the doctors were astonished. No murmur, no enlargement. Everything was completely normal and healthy. It still sends chills down my spine and gives me a knot in my throat. I'm so happy and lucky to still have my brother in my life, and he's even started a family of his own now. Story 3. My great-grandmother's last story before her death. My great-grandmother from my mother's side passed away 2 years ago. She was about 95 to 100 years old. I do not know the exact age because I never asked. 2 months before her death, she told us about an incident that happened many years ago when she was a preteen. She had a maternal aunt who was well known for her beauty. They came from a family of zamindars, aka nobles. Ever since she turned 12, her grandfather started having nightmares of a man who told him to never let his granddaughter get married, as she will be his wife. The grandfather sought the help of an elder to know what that dream actually meant. The elder said that the man he saw in his dream was a jinn who had fallen for his granddaughter. Though he didn't really believe in jinns, he was scared for his granddaughter, and thus rejected most people who proposed to marry her. But there was one person he couldn't refuse. That was his best friend's grandson. That boy was her childhood friend, and he was a frequent visitor in their house. So when he proposed to her in front of the whole family, the grandpa had no choice but to accept it. She, the aunt, was 15 at the time. Everything proceeded without any problem until the night before the marriage. The bride sat in a room with her bridesmaids, including my great-grandmother, when the incident occurred. Suddenly, the bride's hair, which was tied in a traditional way, we call it kopoa, but I don't know the exact English, became extremely hard and her head started hurting. No one knew what was going on except the grandfather. His worst nightmare became reality. The hair stayed like that the whole night. Some other paranormal incidents also occurred that night. That night, the grandfather saw the same man in his dream. This time, he was furious and warned him to never make that mistake again or the consequences would be bad. The next day, her hair became normal again, but the marriage was canceled. The boy was no longer allowed in their house, until the grandfather passed away 3 years later. After that, the boy started visiting them again, and slowly everyone forgot the grandfather's warning. 5 years after that incident, the marriage happened again. This time, nothing paranormal happened. The groom was dressed in white traditional sherwani. His face was glowing with happiness. Unfortunately, that happiness was not for long. That night, the bride was in her room talking with her friends and sisters. Suddenly, the windows and the gates of the house started shaking violently, and loud screams could be heard from outside. A terrible stench started coming from the bride's room. Everyone came out except the bride, who was crying in there. The groom realized his mistake and took permission from the father before entering the room. Suddenly, the door closed behind him, and both of them got locked inside. It took 3 to 4 hours to break the gate from outside. When the family finally got inside, what they saw shook them to their core. The room was stained with blood. The bride was missing, and the groom was lying on the floor. His head was twisted to the opposite side, his eyes were popped out, and his skin was pale. The beautiful white sherwani was stained with blood. On the chair there was a small bag. Inside it there was 1 gold coin. It was the price for the bride. The father spent day and night trying to find the girl, but they couldn't find her. In the end, they had no choice but to accept that she was gone. The bag was put in an iron chest and locked before being buried underground. They considered it their daughter's grave. 3 years later, the father had a dream where that man told him that his daughter was alive and happy. They also had 2 children together. And the bag was a treasure which will give you 1 gold coin each time you put your hand in it. The father never checked if what he said was true or not, as nothing could make up for the loss of his daughter. Today that house is nothing but an abandoned haunted house filled with ghost stories. We call it Babuder Bari, meaning Master's House. That was the first haunted incident in that house. It's actually pretty close to my cousin's house where we go during vacations. Maybe that chest is still there somewhere, but we'll never know. Story 4. He's Still Alive, but I Remember His Funeral, by perryMeks. I'm 30 years old now and not sure how to explain this experience. Since I became aware of it, things haven't felt normal for me. I feel both disoriented and confused, and I haven't been able to share this with anyone. After doing some digging, I found this thread and thought I'd share my experience here. Back when I was around 13 years old in school, I had a classmate who transferred from another school. We weren't friends, but we were in the same class, and our parents knew each other. Our dads went to school together and would exchange greetings at PTA meetings. My dad occasionally asked me to hang out with him and would ask how he was doing. Although I didn't really spend time with him, I would say he was doing fine when asked. A couple of years later, when I was around 15 or 16, he missed a few days of class. I didn't notice until my dad told me that his father had passed away. Feeling sad for him, my dad said he attended the funeral with a few friends on his way back from work. I vaguely remember he visited, but I clearly recall my dad encouraging me over the following weeks to talk to my classmate, given what he was going through. The second time he mentioned it, I asked what I should say to him, and I didn't know, and my dad advised me not to bring up his father during our chats. I never really made an effort to talk to him, but I noticed he wasn't as playful anymore and sometimes mentioned his father's passing in conversation. Years went by, and about 3 or 4 months ago, I happened to see him on Facebook. I didn't remember adding him as a friend, but he had posted a picture with his father. When I clicked on it, I saw it was a recent picture. Confused, I started looking through his profile and found that he'd been posting photos with his dad for years, including family trips, and his face looked so familiar. At first, I thought maybe his mom had remarried and he had a stepdad, but when I asked my dad about it, he denied that his father had ever passed away, saying nothing like that had ever happened. My dad, who was in his 60s and in good health, seemed certain. I then suddenly asked my mom, and she vaguely remembered something but couldn't confirm. I'm extremely confused and can't make sense of what happened. It continues to bother me. Story 5. Missing Heads by Daughter of Saturn 13. I'm back again and here to share another creepy story. If you have read my other recent post, you know that I mentioned growing up in the woods in a secluded area, and that the house and property we lived on was a hotbed for paranormal activity and strange occurrences. I honestly believe the land was cursed hundreds of years ago. Anyway, we always had a ton of pets, and even had a small personal farm with all sorts of animals. For some reason, though, we had horrible luck keeping anything alive. Our pets would die in the strangest of accidents and most gruesome ways. Nothing would live long, and we constantly dealt with death. So obviously, with so many deaths, we began to grow quite a large pet cemetery in our backyard. What was strange and unexplainable was what happened after we buried them. I remember going to visit the grave of a recently buried pet and noticing it was dug up and its head was missing. This happened every time, and we all thought it was a fox or some other wild animal. This would go on for years and leave us completely confused and honestly creeped out. One day, our dog, who was very old at this point and on his way out, was put down at the vet's, and we brought him home to bury him. We wrapped him in a white blanket and had to dig a very big hole because he was a huge dog, about 6 feet in length, and also weighed a lot. 2 days after we buried him, my sister and I made our way out back to visit our dog's grave. As we approached, I noticed something was off. There was a pile of dug-up dirt and some white sheet exposed from the ground. Something dug up our dog, and it dug where the head was located and took it from the body while leaving the body still buried and untouched. This immediately scared me to death because I now knew this was not a fox or some other wild animal, because there was nothing that would be able to take that head considering the size of my dog's head. It's completely not possible. This left us all creeped out and wondering what could possibly do this and why it was doing it. Because of the horrible luck we had with animals, we really began to think there was something wrong with us and couldn't understand how this was constantly happening and what we were doing wrong. After finally moving from there years and years later, we had 0 issues with pets dying and managed to have them all live out to old age. Thus we realized it was not us, but something seriously wrong with that property that was impacting the animals. It wasn't just animals either. My baby brother also died on that property. He suffocated while laying in bed and was unable to be resuscitated. Another horrific incident happened there in the middle of the night. A priest was driving down the highway by our house when he suddenly struck the telephone pole next to our mailbox. His car drove up a pole, shooting it up in the air. He was then ejected out of the windshield and died in our front yard. I remember finding his Bible the next day in the grass. We almost didn't make it either. One cold January night, while my dad was away in another state working, my siblings and I, along with my mom, all huddled up in the living room near the wood-burning stove to keep warm, while we camped out with pillows and blankets watching movies. I suddenly awoke from my sleep and said calmly, "The house is on fire." This startled my mom, which prompted her to investigate, and it was, in fact, on fire. We all managed to run out with just the clothes on our backs, but the house, which was 300 years old and made of cedar, went up like a match and literally burned to the ground, leaving not even a beam behind. If I had never woken up to say that, we would have most likely been killed from the fire, especially with how fast it had happened. This land has a history of tragedy, and even in the current day, It continues to harvest more negative energy by destroying everything that steps foot upon it, causing more torment and pain. It's been 19 years since I moved away, and I still, to this day, constantly dream of the property multiple times a month. My siblings and mother do as well. It's like we can't escape it. Story 6. I Was Friends with a Ghost by itskyyoo. When I, male and 25, was little, around 3 or 4, my family lived in a city with many historic buildings and houses that were built in the late 1800s. Our house was one of these historic buildings, so there were lots of public records available for it, and the house was even featured as part of the local historical bus tour. In this house, there was a room on the second floor which was colder than every other room in the house. My parents said that this was due to the room being an addition and subsequently having poorer insulation. However, I'm not sure if this is true. The room was small and square and stuck out from the side of the house, so it had windows on 3 walls. While we lived there, this room was designated as my playroom, and all of my toys were kept there. I used to tell my parents about how a little girl often came to play with me. I described to them that she had brown hair and a white dress with poofy sleeves, and that she was my age and would come in through the window. Again, this room was on the second floor. I'm not sure what my parents thought of this at the time, but probably chalked it up to my overactive imagination. A year or so later, we were living in a new house in a new city, and my parents were doing some scrapbooking. They had gotten old newspaper clippings and other documents about the house from those local public records. At one point, my mom was looking at an old newspaper clipping of the original family who owned the house, and I pointed out the daughter in the picture and said to my mom, "That's the little girl that played with me." I saw my family a few days ago at Thanksgiving, and was reminded of this while reminiscing. This is one of 2 major paranormal events that have happened to me in my life so far. This was 20 years ago, but I will see if my mom still had that scrapbook they put together of the house, and see if it still had that photograph so I can provide an update. Update. There were actually 3 photographs of the girl. Also, my mom corrected me when I visited today that the photo I pointed to was not of the girl and her family. It was of the girl and her dog. The records that we have available for the house say that the house was remodeled in 1924. One of the pictures that was with the pictures of the girl was a picture of the house before it was remodeled, which places the girl as having lived before 1924. The picture of the house is included in the photo post. Story 7. Encountering a Mimic by Kelseeriie. I, 36 and female, live with my daughter Olivia, 16 and female, in a small town in South Dakota. She goes with her father every weekend. She leaves every Friday afternoon and comes back Sunday evenings, so usually she'll be gone by the time I get home from work on Friday evenings. This particular Friday, when I pulled up to our driveway, I looked up at her window and noticed her bedroom light was still on. I figured she accidentally left it on before leaving. I walked into the house and heard movement coming from upstairs. "Oh, she's still home," I whispered to myself. I went upstairs and knocked on her bedroom door and slowly opened it. "Your dad isn't picking you up this weekend?" I asked. "No, I told him I want to stay," she said while looking down at her journal. "Great. I'll make dinner for us and we can watch a movie if you'd like." There was a long pause before she said yes. I closed her door, and I thought she was acting a bit standoffish. She usually has a lot to say. I texted her dad, asking if they maybe got into some sort of disagreement or argument that led her to not wanting to go with him this weekend. I went downstairs and started making dinner for us. As the food was cooking, I started organizing things around the house, and I noticed Olivia's book bag and coat weren't hung where we usually hang our things when we get home. I thought maybe she just took her things up to her room. No biggie. I went into the living room and saw Olivia sitting on the couch facing away from me. I didn't even hear her coming down the stairs. She kind of startled me, especially because she was just sitting there, not on her phone like usual, and the TV was off. I walked over to the kitchen and checked on the food. I yelled out to ask her to pick out a movie for us. I went out to check what movie she picked, and to my surprise, the TV was still off, and she was still sitting there, motionless. "Olivia, you didn't hear me?" I said. I grabbed the remote and picked out a movie. I chose The Conjuring. I love Vera Farmiga. I grabbed our plates, and as I sat down on the couch, I heard a notification coming from my phone in the kitchen. I told her I'd be right back. I checked my phone, and it was a text from her father. After reading his message, my body went cold and stiff, literal chills. He said, "What do you mean? I picked Olivia up from school, and we're grabbing dinner with her grandma right now." I felt catatonic at this point. I took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the living room, peeking in to see if it was still just sitting on the couch. It was. It was just sitting there, very still, looking forward but away from me. I hadn't even seen Olivia's face since I'd been home, like the thing had purposely been avoiding eye contact. I went back into the kitchen. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified. I had to go back out there. My car keys were in the living room. I took a deep breath and got the courage to walk out confidently, like everything was normal. It was gone. I don't know why I yelled out, "Olivia!" My stupid, confused human instincts. I heard its voice coming from upstairs, sounding just like my Olivia. It said, "Mom, I'm upstairs. I need your help," in the most sinister voice. Hell no. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house. I was shaking so much I couldn't even put the damn keys in the ignition. God, I wished I had a push start just for this very moment. As I reversed out of my driveway, I looked up at the house, and it was at Olivia's window, waving at me, faceless. I couldn't even breathe. I never drove off so fast in all my life. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Dreadweaver. I'll be back next week with more terrifying tales. If you would like to submit a story of your own, head to our subreddit, r/thedreadweaver, or send us an email at thedreadweaver@outlook.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications if you want to hear more. Until our paths cross again in the shadows, stay vigilant and beware the whispers of the night. This is the Dreadweaver, signing off.